Well, firstly, Diana, thank you for having me. It is an absolute pleasure. If any of you read my bio, I am a proud Southwestern alum. I like to give back to the football program, to career services, anything that contributes to promoting the university's brand and future success, student success, retention. I had an amazing experience as a student there, and it's sort of contributed to my professional network, professional success, and the relationships that I have from Southwestern are near and dear to my heart. So any opportunity that I get to give back, in a sense, it's an absolute pleasure, and I jump at it every chance I get. So it's great to be back to some extent. So I'll kick things off. But today we'll be talking about how to put your network to use. When you think about networking is just human connection and leveraging connections to either serve someone else or to open an opportunity or a door for you. And when we think about opening doors, this presentation will be a bit unconventional. I'll go through some slides and talk through framework and methodology that you can apply and that you can use, and sort of the objectives that we have for today. But at the end, I'll sort of conduct an interview with a very close connection, best friend of mine, who can provide a different perspective, because I myself, having been in the staffing talent acquisition space for 5 years, people use me to network all the time. I sort of like get the behind the scenes view of a corporate entity. Working for VMware, it's a company with 35,000 employees. So it's constant networking, constant emails, and it's a corporation. But my best friend, Bear, he's a founder of a company. He's in the startup space. He's had to open a lot of doors for himself. And I think that it would be great perspective to hear from me, someone who's a recruiter on that side, and then someone from his perspective, who has had to create a lot of these opportunities, leverage relationships, and then just to get our take on how we both think about networking as a whole. But I'll start this off with our PowerPoint presentation. So let's get it going. All right, is everyone able to see my screen? Got it. So firstly, Southwestern alum, graduated in 2017 in the spring. After Southwestern, I found myself working for a staffing agency, and I recruited for roughly a year, and then I sold technology services for roughly 3 years. And through that experience, was able to network and work with some top technology executives here in Austin at companies like Yeti, Kendra Scott, Apple, organizations that have a large presence in the tech space in Austin geographically. So it allowed for me to expand my network and also have to go through a multitude of networking exercises, because oftentimes in the recruitment world, it's not as simple as just sending someone a message, but it's putting your network to use, looking at how we can get referrals, and then getting in front of a lot of these technology executives in order for them to give me the opportunity to have their business, or to partner with them, or to serve them. In some sense, it definitely took lots of networking, lots of relationship building, and really contributing to the trust factor so that we could build those connections. And a lot of them still go on today, even though I've transitioned to VMware. But I've been working at VMware for roughly a year and a half. Amazing company for anyone who is considering. I feel like I'm always recruiting. So if anyone is considering a job, VMware, amazing place to be. 30,000 employees. We enable companies with our technologies. SaaS, subscription-based modeling. So anything that can optimize infrastructure, we take care of it. So I'll sort of move on there. So today's objectives would definitely like to put some practical application for networking techniques on display. So looking at, how can we leverage our resources that are at our disposal? How can we look at LinkedIn? How do we craft a targeted message? How do we really hone in and identify what our end goal is and what the end result is? Also, just like to effectively quantify the value of one's network. And I think a network is limitless. Southwestern has an alumni association with 15,000 plus people worldwide. There's 7.9 plus billion people on this earth. LinkedIn has 740 million active users. So to be able to tap into those avenues is invaluable. So just wanted to put that on notice, and then provide different perspectives. I alluded to it earlier with myself being a recruiter and Bear being a founder of a startup. I think that there'll be some great back and forth dialogue there. And then just give a framework and an approach whenever you do think about networking and you're considering all of these possibilities and just honing it in a bit, because at the end of the day, there's no perfect solution. There's not one way. And the goal today is really to show that you can be unconventional, you can be conventional, you can go through the front door, or maybe you have to climb through a window or go through the back door whenever networking to create opportunities or to create opportunities for someone else. But really wanted to illustrate that through conversation and the presentation. And then lastly, just empowering everyone who's either viewing it live time right now or anyone who's coming back to revisit this later to create opportunities for yourself through your network, and also to create opportunities for others. It's not, I don't think that networking should be viewed as something that's always self-serving. And with Southwestern, I think we have a strong alumni base and a strong brand and reputation that comes with networking. So why not continue to enable others to create opportunities by leveraging the Southwestern Alumni Network? But moving on, so quote from Richard Branson: "Succeeding in business is all about making connections." And that is, that is true. That is fact. Things aren't possible without people, and building connections with people is what will ultimately lead to success in business or any other endeavor that you pursue. You have to be able to rely on people for that and making those connections. So unsure why there's not words here, but I remember what was on the slide, so it's all good. But the why, so it's limitless. There's no limit to the amount of people that you can tap into with your network. Like I said earlier, with the amount of people that are in the Southwestern Alumni Network, amount of people worldwide, amount of people on LinkedIn, you can go as far as you want to take it. And with it being a limitless resource, why wouldn't you leverage it in order to take that next step or get you to that next stage of where you like to be? And secondly, the why, when it comes to networking and when it comes to people interaction and ways to create opportunities, what networking does is it creates a backdoor for you, and it gives you access to things that aren't necessarily accessible to the general public. So when we look at data and statistics, there's 70% of job opportunities that become available to people just through general networking, like things that aren't even posted online, things that you don't have access to if you just go and submit your resume. And then when we look at labor statistics, 80% of jobs, or whenever people were surveyed, and this was done by CNBC, 80% of the jobs that were filled and indirectly or directly by networking in some capacity. So when you want access to things that just aren't online, if you want to give yourself a higher probability of creating an opportunity or getting a job or building your business, networking is an essential practice. So when we tap into the limitless, oh, well, there we go. But that's the data that I just alluded to, and then transitioning here a bit. So, when we think about a framework, something that's simple, practical, that you can think about whenever you're going into a situation and you have no idea what to do when it comes to networking, there's all these possibilities. It's like, where do I even start? Where do I go? Firstly, I think you have to start with the end in mind. Whenever you reach out to that person or you reach out to that group or you put yourself in that situation for, business opportunity, job opportunity, or serving others, you have to think about the end goal, and that end goal ultimately taps into the message that you send across, and you have to let that person know so that they can sort of know how to best help you. Because if you don't know what you're going in for, then oftentimes the edge isn't going to be sharp with the message, and there may not be clarity when figuring out, what's the best way to leverage, or what's the best next step, the best action item. When we can be as clear as possible, that will ultimately lead to better results, more clearly defined results. When it comes to tools and resources, me being a recruiter, I am the biggest proponent of LinkedIn, just with the amount of utilization. The platform is continuing to grow. There's more and more people like on LinkedIn every single day. The user count is going up. There's education, there's focus groups, there's live webinars. And if you send someone a LinkedIn message, just based on data and also my personal experience, likely to get a response via LinkedIn more so than email most times. So, through LinkedIn conversations, you can lead yourself to new opportunities. And probably, and this is in my opinion, I think that you may have varying thoughts on this, but when it comes to networking, I think that the initial message that you send across to someone, whether it's, you meeting them in person for the first time, or you getting on the phone, or you sending them an email, or you sending them a LinkedIn message, that message is critical. And the reason that it's critical is because that's the first impression. That's what the person is seeing when they think of you and your brand, and exactly what are we doing? What's the goal? What are we trying to get to? And the way that you portray that, I think it says a lot about you. So in many situations as a recruiter, people will message me and they'll just say, "Hey, Justin, I came across this job and, I was wondering if you could help me with that." But there's no personalization with that. There's no going above and beyond with, with their personal touch, or a bit of personality, or, there's a common ground and there's a connection that we share. I think that's critical to be able to tap into when you look at sending the message to the other person. Like, find some common ground, find something that, you both think about, find an experience that you both have gone through, and leverage that in your message, because that's going to lead to human connection, and that's going to make this networking event or this networking experience so much more valuable for you and for that person. And it's going to make them much more inclined to actually want to help you, and to want to make the introduction, or help your business. But that's key, critical. And then lastly, execution. That can be very broad. Are we talking about next steps? Are we talking about making an introduction to someone? Are we talking about them potentially investing in something that you have? Is it them getting you into the interview process? But you have to establish that execution on the front end, when you look at end results in mind, you think about what is it that when I'm going in and I'm focusing and I'm sending this person a message, what is the end goal? And that will ultimately influence how you execute on this strategy and this framework. So now I'd like to transition here a bit to the last section, and Bear and I sort of going back and forth, but opening doors with Bear Vasquez, because he's had to kick down a few doors, had to go under the door a few times, and he's also my best friend, and he's founded a company called Atreides. So Bear, if you could reveal yourself, would love to see you.
Yeah. So hi, everyone who's presently on the call, and for those who will watch it once it's available and posted online. It's great to be here. I'm excited to be here as an alum. I'm a graduate of Southwestern as well, same class here as Justin, 2017. And I really enjoy doing these things. It's awesome to be able to give back to the community, to inflect on experiences that we've had since having left Southwestern, and then pay that forward to everyone who is joining these calls, and in an effort to give themselves more tools and more resources in both a professional and personal developmental intention. And so with that being said, I'm very appreciative for Diana for having set this up, and then Justin for hosting it and doing a phenomenal job. And I'll say in this interview, if there's any point at which there's a question regarding anything that I say, please interject and bring it up, and I'll go to further links and discussing whatever topics are of interest. So with that being said, Justin, thank you for having me, and let me know how you want to proceed.
Yes, always a pleasure. You can kick back a little bit. You look a little stiff. So, yeah, there you go. Get comfortable. No, but you obviously, like, having graduated from Southwestern, you went to law school, you're founding this company. Through that, there are a lot of connections that you've had to build, and relationships that people have trusted you with, and like made introductions, conversations that you've had to have. But when you think about networking, like how would you describe that? Like what's the first thing that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, so like thinking about that, just like knee-jerk reaction is the word opportunities. Opportunities as a concept, and then the natural consequence of seizing those opportunities. And so I would say that it's played a fundamentally pivotal role in my career path thus far. As you highlighted, I went to Stanford Law School, and from there did a number of things and worked in corporate law from LA all the way to New York and everywhere in between, and did a lot of interesting things, worked for the federal government, worked for various state governments, state of Oregon, state of Texas. And then from there, made this decision that I wanted to embark on a different path, one that was more entrepreneurial and didn't really touch on a lot of the experiences that I had gathered in the legal field, or that I was building my career towards. And that took a lot of architecting out, and really networking is what played the most fundamental role in me having been able to do so. And then also just, I think that there's an important analogy to draw and say that it's no different whether you are in a continual path and you have identified what the sole constant North Star is for you, and you're not doing a pivot, you're not trying to architect a pivot, rather you're trying to climb to the top of your organization to a position of leadership. Networking there plays just as an important role, because it's an internal networking. And so I would make the identification of there being internal networking within one's organization, and there being different approaches for that, and then also external networking outside of your organization for different endeavors that you have. But I think at its base is that in the law, there's this term that we use as a rainmaker, and a rainmaker is a person who brings in all of the capital or the money or the most amount of work. And I would say, like, within the toolkit that any professional has, in my personal opinion, networking is the rainmaker of those of the tools that you have at your disposal, as in addition to whatever substantive skill set that you have or your education or the value that you're adding to an organization, whether that's your own or another. That networking is just as important, because as you identified early in the call, everything that we have and everything that we know is built off of human relations. And so it's critical for advancing, for gathering opportunities and new horizons to be able to exercise that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I thank you for sharing your background, elaborating a bit on just the integral role that networking has played and the emphasis that you put on it whenever when you think about how can I get better, how can I expand, how can I build and create something, and with networking serving as a base and a foundation for that. Great to hear from your end. When you think about all of the people that you've had to interact with over the years and the connections that have been made, I know you've been introduced to a lot of these folks, but you've created conversation through messages, and I know that you've gone to some unconventional links in some capacity at certain times. But can you talk to us about your message and how you strategize when you put together a message to that person that you're wanting to either connect with directly, or that you're trying to help, or that you're asking, hey, can you help me? Can you help me get to this next phase?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a great question. And it's I'm going to give you a framework, but I'm going to lace that framework in saying that the probably annoying answer and somewhat dodgy is that it really depends, right? And what I mean by that is that you have to know who your audience is, and that should be the background principle of whatever message you're sending or whoever you're trying to get in contact with. But generally speaking, I have three rules, and what I'll say is perhaps an additional preface is that there's a high degree of intentionality that goes behind these messages, whether these messages are spoken word, phone call, or email. Traditionally, I'm going to say the following in the context of an email, because the hypothetical is that I'm trying to get in contact with someone who I don't know, or maybe I haven't met before, who I'm looking for some relational opportunity, whether that's a follow-up conversation, an introduction, or whatnot. But I really labor over these, and it takes a long time to actually sit down and think about how you're going to sort of architect this out. And the three rules that I typically try to follow is, number one, you actually said it earlier, or a version of it, which is special knowledge. I say special knowledge, and what I mean by that is to say something that reveals a shared or inside knowledge, either of or with that person. And so you want to make them feel, even if it's at a subconscious level, that you understand them. Again, this is all human relations here. And so you want them to feel that you have, if it's a person in high power, you want them to feel like you are familiar with their background, you're familiar with the significance of their role in an organization or of their accomplishments. And so you want to showcase that at the outset, so that you're not just another person who wants something from a person who is likely has little bandwidth and probably receives hundreds of messages or emails a day. And so, and or if it's someone else, being able to show common ground, as you had pointed out, sort of a similar background, a similar interest, or so on and so forth. And so, really, that's the first rule, is special knowledge. The second is to finesse the ask. And so, there's what I mean by that is that you should not reach out to someone or message them, or I don't, at least, without knowing what it is that I'm wanting from that person. I think it's important, again, to have a high degree of intentionality, and you want to be explicit about what you're asking for, because if you just reach out to someone because you're like, I want to like talk to this person, they'd be good to know, and then you sort of get caught like a deer in the headlights, and you're like, you don't really have any plan or actionable strategy with which you implemented for your outreach, and they're sort of scratching their head like, what does this person need from me? What do they want from me? Because you might only get one shot as far as communication goes with this person in the form of a response. But with that being said, the caveat is, and where the finesse comes in, is that you don't want to spook them. And so you don't want to be formal and come out. So in the example of, I'm trying to fundraise or raise capital for a new startup idea, if I'm trying to make connections and I'm hoping that one of these investors is going to be a long-term relationship, I'm not out of the gate going to just ask, can you give me $1 million for my company, or for this idea? So there's a fine line in between there, and it varies depending on the context. But really, for anyone who is interested in really meeting someone for the first time or having a first conversation, a general rule that I use in finessing the ask, if I don't have anything specific that I need from this person, I usually ask for their story. And so I'll say, would you mind sharing a story of your background, or how you got to where you are right now, how you came into X, Y, or Z field, how you rose to this position of prominence in your organization. And that really allows them, it's sort of an open-ended way to allow them to share more about themselves, and they will be more inclined to do that than if you don't know them and you're immediately asking for a favor. And that's really just speaks to human nature, which is that naturally we as humans like to talk about ourselves and share more. And so we'll jump at that much sooner. Sometimes maybe the individual is very altruistic. We can hope for that, but oftentimes we'll jump sooner at that, especially if we're busy or don't have a firm relationship with someone to be willing to go out on a branch and do them a favor. The sort of third rule that I have for messaging is get them in person. By all means, any means necessary and possible, get them in person for a follow-up connection, especially if it's one that you think, after having done a cost benefit analysis, is worthwhile of investing your time further in. And I know it's the grain of salt here is that it's a little harder to do in COVID for all of the obvious reasons. And it's also harder to do if the person is in a geographical region that you're not yet in and you want to be in, and or if there's any sort of spatial or time disconnect. But that notwithstanding, at whatever lengths possible, try to get them in person. And that really is because, again, it's relationship building, and you're able to get someone, by someone agreeing to meet you in person and getting them in person, it is a unspoken investment in you already, because it takes more time, it takes more effort, takes more energy to meet someone in person. And so that already says, that already speaks to a level of seriousness on behalf of both participants, both me as the message sender and my target, is that you're already further along in the opportunity to advance and deepen that relationship and make it a part of your network.
Thank you. I love the three. I've never heard like the way you worded finesse the ask. that is smooth, and how you integrated intentionality with that, and special knowledge, like coming in. There has to be something that draws this person to your message. There has to be something that connects with them. There has to be something that reveals something to them, and I think that that special knowledge shows that you're interested, you're serious, that you went and did your homework, and you think that the connection is worth your while, and you've gone out of your way to make that connection. So love all those things, Bear. I don't want to take too much more of your time. I have one last question, because I know you've had to jump through a mini hoop, haven't always gone through the front door. And you and I, we talk about this analogy all the time. It's not always, networking your way through the front door, but sometimes you may have to climb through a window or go through the back door. And, conventional doesn't always lead to the best result. So could you maybe tell us a story? I know you were talking about stories and how people like to talk about themselves. your last but yeah, if you could share maybe a brief story with us about how you've networked your way in an unconventional way, and it led to a success in your opinion, or some desired outcomes for you.
Yeah, no, actually, I will, and I'm actually going. So I'm going to share a story that's happened recently, one that you actually know a little bit about because you were actually there with me when this started. And in some ways, there wasn't intention for what it would end in was different than what it has transpired from in recent times. So to give like a little bit of context, when you were, this is all new information for everyone else on the call, but we were vacationing together a couple of months ago in November in Oregon. We do it every so often, Justin and I. And while we were down there, there was an individual who I had become aware of, who was a Stanford University graduate and also went to a professional degree program, the Stanford Graduate School of Business, which I actually was not a graduate from. I was at the law school. And although I had connections with the Graduate School of Business, I wasn't a graduate there, but I felt like that there were, even though the connections might have been of second and third world order, that there was enough there to justify me trying to get in contact with this individual. And he was the president and the founding director of the largest private equity firm in the Pacific Northwest. And my reasons for wanting to get in contact with him was just because I wanted to find someone in the corporate world that was familiar and with the city of Portland, Oregon, and that had understanding of what the landscape looked like in terms of professional opportunities. And I just wanted to meet this person. And so the way in which I went about it was I had actually, his contact information wasn't available on the website. So I found another person who was the vice president of the organization whose contact was available. And I did a little research on the person. The person was actually a law graduate from Yale. And so I saw that there was a similarity between this person was in a high finance role and was coming to it from a non-conventional background that we shared together. And so I immediately picked up on that shared knowledge and experience and emailed that person and asked to hear their story. I said, I'm in town. Would it be possible for us to connect at some point? I'm a recent graduate of law school. I went to law school as well. And what I asked him was, I'm curious about your transition from a legal role to a finance and investment role. And long story short is we were able to connect and have the conversation. It ended up being a phone call. And on the phone call, I asked him I just came out and was explicit in asking if this gentleman who was the founding partner of this private equity fund would be willing to have a conversation with me. And so he asked, and we were able to connect via email. And the gentleman actually invited me 2 days later, if you remember, to go have dinner with him, and invited me to the office. And we actually ended up connecting in person and had about a 2 hour conversation. And it was very casual, very organic, very fluid. And at the conclusion of the conversation, I asked him if he would be willing to stay in contact with me and be sort of like a Portland, Oregon point of contact and potentially future mentor. And so we did, and I made good on my efforts to stay in contact with them every so often after then. That's been about 6 months ago. And so I realized through more research and due diligence that he had a shared interest in what I was doing with the company that I started, Atreides. Atreides is a blockchain solution for water resource management. And I realized that this person was actually chairman of the board formerly for the Nature Conservancy. And one of the Nature Conservancy's main goals globally is to combat issues of mismanagement of water resources, both scarcity and quality. And so I reached out again, and I had updated and nurtured that relationship a couple of times in the interim with no idea that this future opportunity might be before me. And so I told him about what I was doing with Atreides. I made clear that we were raising investor rounds and trying to raise capital for the organization. And I asked for the opportunity to, if he was interested, to pitch him to invest in the company. And I did, and he is now an investor in my organization and put forth a significant amount of capital from his firm. And it was a really non-conventional way of getting to where from point zero, or I guess like point A to like point B, C, D, and E, which is where I'm at now, which was I targeted someone in an area, a geography that I was interested in. And my intention behind building that relationship was completely different then from where we are now. But because I had went through and done research and cold emailed people down the ladder and went through a series of steps to get to this one person who I wanted to speak with and I wanted to build a relationship and rapport with, I was able to break down a lot of other barriers in the interim. And then I went further and took care to follow up on the relationship. And I didn't let it stay stagnant to where at indefinite point in the future, I had a firm enough relationship, I felt like, to call this person up and to ask them for a favor for me, and which actually ended up being a huge benefit, not only for my organization, but it added to opportunities for his. And so I think it goes to show the sort of illustration that you gave is that oftentimes there's not, you go to the front door, maybe the front door is closed, maybe it's locked, maybe there's a bouncer outside that says you don't meet X, Y, or Z requirement. You say, okay, I'm going to go around and check the back door. You go to the back door, maybe the back door is locked. Maybe there is no back door. And so you got to find a window, a crack, a crevice to force your way in there and really just keep pursuing that, because like in my experience, 95% of the time, there's a way into that building. There's a way into that room. And you just have to be creative enough to architect out and through trial and error, figure out what works and what doesn't. And oftentimes it'll surprise you in ways in which it does work out. And you'll have relationships surface in ways that you wouldn't have anticipated before then. So that's the example of I guess the window invasion of this relationship, and there's so many other ways in which that's played out. But it's such an important tool to have, is just creativity and persistency when it comes to things like that.
Yeah, I know you told me a bit about it, but now I got like all the details of behind the scenes. Yeah, I usually just for everybody's contact, I usually just hear Bear say like, "Hey, like I made this happen," and then like we just it's just like the results. But to be able to hear it and to like walk all the way through it step by step by step, makes it that much more impressive. So thank you for giving us your time, Bear. Thank you for sharing that story with us, your framework and approach, and joining today. But feel free to jump if you have other things to do, and we'll finish off here.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, everyone else. And y'all have a great rest of the day.
Yeah. Thanks, babe. All right. So do we have any questions? Definitely wanted to do Q&A. It was a bit of an unorthodox approach with this, but yeah, want to finish it formally with Q&A. Any questions out there?
There was 2 or 3 questions that came in through the RSVP form, so I'm going to put those in the chat.
Okay. Okay. So when you say multiple sources, is the person who wrote the question, are they here, Diane?
They're not here.
They're not here. Okay. I would respond to their question with a question. And they say, or maybe you can define it for me. How do you navigate multiple sources of networks, especially when they overlap? Do you know what they mean by multiple sources?
I do not. I'm trying to read in between the lines to try to see.
Yeah. The second one is a bit more clear. So the question is, how do you make genuine connections when networking? It can sometimes seem like networking is very transactional and getting from one place to another rather than fostering authentic friendships / connections. I think that authenticity is so critical. It's imperative when you send the message out, and I feel like most of the time, your intentions are pure, and if they are pure, they show through your message. But I'll give an example of a situation that I was in, and sort of how I networked my way into this job opportunity. But just like what Bear alluded to, you have to sort of foster the relationships. You have to, reach back out. There has to be follow-ups just so that things don't go stale or stagnant. But a past colleague of mine that I probably hadn't worked with formally in over 3 years, they had gone on from the company that I was at, and they transitioned to VMware. VMware being everything that I wanted: big tech company, $11 billion in revenue every year, great company, like diversity strategy, the brand, compensation packages are what you want in tech. Like all the things were great, and they had ethical integrity. It was where I knew I wanted to be. And I reached out to a past colleague, and in the message, I knew that she had been in my shoes. I knew that she had been in that exact same situation where you're working at this place, and you know that the end has come. You know that it's time for you to move on, that your journey here is ended, and there's no longer, true interest, and your heart isn't in this. And I poured out my heart in the message and relayed that, because I knew that, because that individual had been there, they would know exactly how I felt. They would be able to resonate with my message, and ultimately they would be inclined to help me to get out of that situation, because maybe someone helped them, and they could really feel my emotions, and they could feel where exactly I was coming from in my point of view. So long story short, reach out, and just like Bear said, you ask for, their story. You ask for them to tell you about what it is that they do, because that's genuine. Like, you aren't, even if they don't get you the job, or even if they don't make the introduction, you should always have that general interest in people. So I was genuinely interested in how VMware was. I was interested in how she got to VMware, how she enjoyed it. And that was what I asked her to talk about, not, hey, can you get me a job at VMware? And ultimately, we have the chat, things go well. There wasn't an opportunity, but 3 months later down the road, she reached out and said, hey, my manager is actually looking to bring someone on board. And lo and behold, manager was a Southwestern graduate. So that job was mine. It was, I knew it was mine, and it all, it all sort of worked out, but it was being genuine on the front end, asking to hear about her story, what she had to say, how she felt about the job, not how can you help me? Yes, the fellow pirate connections. Love it, Grace. Thank you. Any other questions, Diana, or anyone else in the audience have any questions? Perfect. Well, thank you all for joining. I hope that there's some value in this, that you enjoyed hearing me and me and Bear talk. Thank you for the time. And Diana, again, really appreciate you allowing for me to participate in the series. Love coming back to Southwestern, even if it's from the comfort of my own home. So yeah.
All right.
Thanks,
you
Justin.
Oh, very
Thank
welcome.
you. Thank you everyone for joining.